Some projects are stupid. Others are extremely risky and dangerous. And then there's trying to go to Mars. An adventure that can make you bite the dust, crush you, suffocate you, irradiate you, not necessarily in that order. Yet, over the past few years, the Red Planet has become a kind of fantasy. Fueled by public curiosity, NASA's enthusiastic conferences, and the lofty ambitions of Elon Musk. To the point where one might almost come to believe that in the relatively near future, humanity will build and inhabit a pressurized station overlooking the Martian desert. Except that, when you dig a little deeper into what a manned mission to Mars truly involves, you quickly realize that it's not only a project of unimaginable difficulty, but also, in many ways, a profoundly stupid idea, which includes a staggering number of opportunities for the red dream to turn into a nightmare. Because even if Mars is not technically out of reach, the planet is surrounded by obstacles that all seem to have been designed to make your life more difficult, and which hide a whole bunch of delightfully different ways to die. To look at, with a bit more clarity and a bit less marketing optimism, the challenges involved in sending humans there and bringing them back alive. We're going to slip into the suit of astronauts who are brave enough, and maybe a bit reckless, to carry out the first manned mission to Mars, as we envision it today. We are in the 2040s. You are still in good health, and you have just left Earth aboard your rocket to board your spacecraft, which was built to take you to Mars. This one looks more like a small modular space station than a rocket. And it was assembled in orbit, module by module over the previous years. And to say the least, the space allotted to you isn't very big. You find yourself in a sort of projectile with seats, and the already gigantic storage volume surrounding you is only a tiny part of what you'll need to survive the nearly 1,000 days of the mission ahead of you. Sending all the equipment you'll need at once would be like trying to move a building with a catapult. That's why a large part of the cargo has already been sent on much longer and more energy-efficient orbital trajectories than the one you will take. And it's already in orbit around Mars or sitting on its surface. And now, the time for your departure has come. From the moment you ignite the boosters, you know there will be no way back for almost 2.5 years. You have signed up for 7 months of travel in space, both on the way there and back, with in between 1.5 years spent on the surface of Mars. From that point on, all the ingenuity of the mission will be devoted to trying not to die between departure and arrival. The good news is that these orbital trajectories are well understood and have already been used by robots. The bad news is you're not a machine. The laws of nature should let you pass, but they will demand a monstrous toll from you. Because interplanetary space is an environment that cordially despises mammals. Going to Mars is not just about crossing space. It's agreeing to live in an environment that insidiously reminds you that you are a product of Earth. And that as soon as we move away from our place of origin, we leave parts of ourselves behind. Because while, on paper, living in zero gravity might seem wonderful, in reality, your body is much less enthusiastic. From its point of view, this adventure is like a slow and methodical demolition process with a panic option. Because the human body, as soon as you put it in space, reveals an amazing ability to become grotesque and to make very poor choices. On Earth, our bodily fluids are kindly pulled down toward our legs and abdomen. But in weightlessness, they move up toward your chest and head, so you become slightly puffy, while at the same time, blood drains from your legs, leaving them shrunken. Your body, which interprets this redistribution as an excess of blood, then starts to get rid of it by producing more urine. And you risk losing up to 20% of your blood volume during the first days of the trip. At the same time, the lack of mechanical stress on your bones sends a catastrophic signal to your brain, which concludes that maybe your skeleton isn't really that necessary after all. And you will undergo a kind of accelerated osteoporosis, losing nearly 1 to 1.5% of bone density per month. Meanwhile, your muscles, without any stimulation, also start to waste away. To keep space, as much as possible, from turning you into a soft, boneless version of yourself. So you'll have to spend a good part of your days in this pressurized cylinder, lost between two worlds, running on treadmills strapped in with harnesses, to fight the biological logic that gently pushes you toward becoming a sophisticated mollusk. And all these little inconveniences are just an appetizer, because after a few months, the redistribution of fluids toward your head may change the shape of your eyeballs, which could very well affect your ability to see up close. And as if that weren't enough, your body also faces another problem, less spectacular, but infinitely more insidious. Because the interplanetary space around you is filled with highly energetic particles that imperceptibly pass right through you. In this cold and hostile environment, atomic nuclei regularly streak through at speeds close to the speed of light, accelerated by stellar explosions. On Earth, the thick atmosphere and the magnetic field of our planet act as a protective shield that absorbs much of this cosmic radiation shower. But in your spacecraft, you no longer have this umbrella, and you are therefore exposed to an invisible shower of subatomic projectiles. The doses you receive aren't necessarily instantly spectacular, but this chronic rain of atomic bullets continuously passes through you as if you were butter. On their way, these tiny particles can break some of your DNA molecules, damage your cells, and trigger a cascade of chemical reactions that, over time, greatly increase the risk of developing cancer. To add a little spice to all this, the constant discomfort of galactic cosmic rays is coupled with the temporary threat of solar flares. The good news is that most of the particles hurled into space by the sun's outbursts can be managed by shielding. If unfortunately a solar flare heads toward your ship, you can take refuge for a few days in parts of the ship whose walls have been shielded to avoid a radiation tan. The bad news is that all these reinforced areas are small. And if unfortunately a major solar flare heads directly toward your ship, you'll probably have to spend several days in a space of just a few cubic meters to avoid getting fried. But if we set aside the fact that a body weakened by gravity, stress, sleep disorders, close quarters, and isolation is not exactly in its most triumphant state, to calmly withstand a subtle bombardment, you can still keep your spirits up. Because it is estimated that overall, throughout the entire mission, the additional risk of developing a fatal cancer should only increase by a few %. Anyway, even if you did develop an illness, it's not certain that you would live long enough to experience it. More worrying still, studies on animals exposed to radiation similar to galactic cosmic rays have shown impaired cognitive performance, and a decrease in activity in the regions of the brain involved in memory and decision-making.
The dark side.
So it might be with a few screws loose that after 7 months of travel, Mars, the magnificent, finally appears in the porthole. You go into orbit and contemplate your probable tomb. Because up until now, you've survived the least dangerous stages of the project. But if we face the truth, Mars is even less hospitable than space. And it's with an IQ that might be slightly reduced and impaired vision that you have to fine-tune your atmospheric entry parameters to manage to land on this planet without crashing. The problem is that Mars has an atmosphere with the double drawback of being too thin to effectively slow down a capsule, while still being thick enough to cause potentially destructive heating of your heat shield. This delightful combination of difficulties gives you about as much margin for error as a final breath, which has caused more than one mission to fail. To land on Mars, your spacecraft has to approach at the right angle, so it doesn't explode in flight or bounce off the atmosphere. It's like trying to make a graceful entrance into a house with a tiny door, a hallway on fire, a slippery floor, and an owner who clearly never intended to let you in. That's why a large number of robotic missions have left their duplicates there. Out of about 50 expeditions sent to Mars, only around 20 have been successful. Most of the others crashed there. Today, we know how to land one-ton rovers on Mars using all sorts of parachute systems, airbags, and retro-rockets. But no space agency has yet designed a lander capable of delivering a module weighing several dozen tons, carrying mammals that have trouble tolerating discomfort and violent decelerations. Engineers are working on a few solutions, but none of them seem like they were designed by someone who was relaxed. And everything seems, on paper, so elegantly perilous that it feels like reading a list of things you should never try above a distant planet. But let's assume that such technology exists. When you confidently begin atmospheric entry, your module quickly reaches the colossal speed of about 20,000 kilometers per hour. Your heat shield, heated by air friction, then rises in temperature and reaches several thousand degrees. If this piece of engineering, which is asked to do the space equivalent of entering a fire first in a flammable suit and coming out as politely as a patrol, deforms and fails, Mars will be your tomb. Again, let's assume that after a series of perfectly choreographed high-flying maneuvers, you manage to land your vital infrastructure, turned into a meteorite, exactly where it was planned. Because for the mission to be a success, it's not enough just to manage to land alive. You also have to be extremely precise and land close to the modules that were sent before you, which contain all the essential equipment needed to survive there and build your base. And to make it through entry, you only get one try. If unfortunately you land hundreds of kilometers away, or worse, on the other side of the planet, you're doomed. Assuming everything went well. Congratulations, you are officially the first humans on another planet. You might think that now that you're there, most of the inconveniences are behind you. Except that in reality, it's another kind of hell that's just beginning. Because even before you start conducting experiments to find out if life ever developed here, you'll have to constantly work to preserve your own. Because once again, if we face the truth, as soon as you arrive, Mars bares its teeth at you. In the first days, you struggle to stand without feeling dizzy. Because during your time in zero gravity, your muscles have weakened and your body, which has lost the habit of fighting gravity in space, has slightly atrophied. And so, it's with the physical condition of a slug suffering from heart failure that you would have to learn to walk again. Because your brain, which has gotten used to functioning in an environment where floor and ceiling no longer really matter, now has to deal with a world where the force of gravity is only 38% of that on Earth. If everything goes well, your small muscles and your atrophied heart should recover quickly enough to allow you to start assembling the base modules. While you're busy, let's take stock. Outside, the landscapes of the red planet are absolutely magnificent. And the fine dust suspended in the atmosphere sometimes gives the sky a reddish-orange hue. But don't go imagining a vast earthly desert that's just more hostile. You're facing an environment that, let's be honest, hates anything alive. For starters, it never rains here at all. The entire planet has a continental desert climate. And all the water you can find on the surface is in the form of ice. It's also terribly cold. The average surface temperature is minus 63 degrees and can drop to minus 140 at night. And above all, the atmosphere. Not only is it made up of 95% carbon dioxide with barely 0.13% oxygen, but it's also extremely thin. If you walked on the surface wearing thick down jackets and oxygen masks, you would die in just a few minutes. Because the atmospheric pressure on Mars, which is 160,000 times lower than on Earth, has terrible consequences for anyone who would dare to go outside without a suit. Exposed to this low pressure, all your bodily fluids, such as saliva, tears, or the mucous membranes in your lungs, would start to boil almost instantly. If you don't like the idea of seeing part of yourself evaporate and then dying in terrible agony, so you'll have to spend your entire stay on the red planet, locked inside pressurized suits or inside airtight habitats with just enough space to keep the peace. And as if all that wasn't enough, the red planet has no magnetic field. And the thin layer of its atmosphere can only stop a tiny fraction of cosmic rays and high-energy solar particles, so you keep getting slowly irradiated on the surface. And these destructive ionizing rays don't just come from space, because the disappearance of the red planet's magnetosphere about 4 billion years ago eventually made the soil radioactive. Here on the surface, radiation levels are on average equivalent to those measured a few kilometers from the Chernobyl power plant in the months following its explosion. For you, the unpleasant consequence is that living on the surface of Mars is like getting an abdominal X-ray every 12 days on average. Or, if you prefer, being exposed in 1 year to 10 times more radiation than the maximum allowed for a nuclear worker. If you were planning to settle for a long time, it would be wise to place your modules in caves or bury them, shielding them under several meters of rock. In your case, your stay will be relatively brief. And anyway, since these cumulative radiation levels are 3 times lower than what you've already been exposed to during your journey through space, why worry about it? If we set aside these radioactive inconveniences, one of your worst enemies here is Martian dust, the regolith. The omnipresence of this dust, enriched with iron oxide, which gives Mars its famous red hue, is likely to quickly get on your nerves. Because this invasive powder is a little pest capable of infiltrating through the slightest weakness in the seals of your equipment. And above all, this wind-blown dust that gets absolutely everywhere is made up of microscopic sharp little grains whose angular shapes act like tiny blades, whose main pastime is scratching anything unfortunate enough to be working. These abrasive particles are also so fine that they become electrically charged in the dry Martian air, to the point where they stick and cling to almost every material. So you'll probably often admire the scenery through dirty windows, and sweeping is likely to become one of your main activities. While returning to the cabin after even the slightest outing will turn into a fierce battle against this extraterrestrial dirt. Because nobody wants to see dust lying around and breathe it in, especially when it's radioactive. In short, regolith isn't going to make you want to laugh. Especially since this dust can be lifted by colossal storms that, on Mars, reach epic proportions, covering entire regions, or in rare cases, the entire planet. And since this kind of phenomenon erupts every 3 years on average, it's possible you might have to endure one during your stay. In that case, you would be wise to avoid going outside for probably several weeks. Because outside, the microscopic razor-sharp dust carried by winds of around 100 kilometers per hour creates a massive airborne sandblasting effect. Under a veiled sky, to the point that in broad daylight, it can get almost as dark as night. It's fair to say it's a bit annoying. For a species that has managed to sequence its genome, harness the energy of atoms, and travel through space, only to end up under house arrest because of the presence of a reddish dust that slips into the seals. Just to add a little more spice to your situation, you have to constantly make sure that this damn dust doesn't fry your instruments. You also have to fight every moment to keep every single molecule of air and water, which here are more precious than gold. On Mars, you simply can't go out for some fresh air. There's no air to breathe. The Martian atmosphere is made up almost entirely of carbon dioxide. That's a bad starting point for anyone who isn't a plant or a bacterium that thrives on fermentation. So, to allow your small colony to breathe, you need to produce your own oxygen. And for that, you have to run a mini factory operating day and night. And its main task is to suck in the Martian atmosphere and produce oxygen from CO2. And then there's water. Searching for it on Mars will become an obsession. Your body obviously needs it for hydration, but you also need it for hygiene, cooking, growing plants, and even to leave. Because it's also through its electrolysis that you can produce the fuel needed to power the rocket that will allow you to return to Earth. In short, on Mars, a simple glass of water could potentially be a breath of air, a salad, a quick shower, a rocket tank, and a lot of engineer meetings.
1 single ounce feeds the entire base. Is it enough for a shower?
Every drop you brought with you must therefore be recycled. And you will have to drink water extracted from the moisture in the air, from sweat, from urine, and even from feces. So many details that Martian tourist brochures forget to mention in the fine print. Here, yesterday's coffee will be tomorrow's coffee, and every quick shower has already, at some point, been in someone's bladder. In polite terms, we call it integrated biogeneration. In less polite terms, they say that on Mars, the line between your compost and tomorrow's dinner becomes philosophically very thin. In short, on the red planet, the circular economy is always the very condition for survival. It's better to leave a bit of your pride there than your life. The good news is that even if your brain might resent this hydrological intimacy, a recycled water molecule is chemically indistinguishable from one from a normal source. The bad news is that creating a truly closed loop is extraordinarily difficult. Even the most advanced systems are not perfectly efficient. For example, the devices on board the International Space Station, which recycle water with a seriousness that would make a camel look wasteful, struggle to achieve more than 90% efficiency. To offset these losses, you can try using the water beneath Mars's surface. Unfortunately, that water is embedded in rocks in frozen form. And anyway, during this mission, it's unlikely that you'll land next to a deposit. In short, you're going to become a recycling tyrant. And then, if you can't stay healthy, you'll also need to feed yourself to stay alive. Growing food on Mars is the kind of idea that, when seen from a couch on Earth, looks like a pretty translucent greenhouse where smiling colonists play around with a few lettuces. Which doesn't do justice at all to the fact that managing to grow a single arugula leaf on Mars is probably just as difficult as sending a rocket into space.
It is alive.
First of all, even before considering planting a single seed, we have to remember that Mars is not a garden. It's a desert freezer under low pressure, bathed in radiation, covered in toxic dust, with soil that looks more like a mineral insult than actual Earth. From there, a pumpkin takes on a whole new meaning. It stops being a vegetable and becomes a provocation. Because trying to grow anything in Martian soil before decontaminating it is like trying to raise trout in a minefield. You'll probably be happy to know that plenty of experiments have been conducted to try to grow plants in soil similar to those on Mars, and in most cases, the plants didn't die. Maybe you'll be a little less happy to know that they lost their leaves and became toxic. Because in Martian soil, there are large amounts of perchlorate salts, which are carcinogenic molecules, especially problematic if you're alive. Even after being decontaminated with bacteria that you would have imported, Martian soil is still about as close to potting soil as a bag of crushed bricks. To make it fertile, you have to recreate a miniature version of the ancient Earth pact between light, water, minerals, and microbes. On our planet, soil fertility relies on an extraordinary number of interactions involving nutrients, but also on communities of thousands of microscopic organisms that together help a seed turn into something we eventually put on our plates. So, to enjoy a salad, you have to be able to recreate a miniature piece of our planet's ecosystem. It's not for nothing that our world is called Earth. So, to start farming, you need to bring with you not only plants, but also some of the biological mess that life needs, while preventing this mess from turning into a disaster. In the 1990s in Arizona, the Biosphere 2 experiment took place. In this experiment, a closed ecosystem was simulated in gigantic airtight greenhouses containing several artificial biomes designed to be self-sufficient and able to feed 8 people for 2 years without any outside input. But soon, the experiment started to go wrong. Unexpected biological imbalances began to appear. The oxygen level in the greenhouses started to drop drastically, and after 16 months of experimentation, it dropped to concentrations equivalent to those found in air at over 4,000 meters altitude. The participants then began to suffer from fatigue and breathing difficulties, and oxygen had to be injected into the biomes to prevent everyone from dying. All of this happened because certain bacteria present in the soil started consuming more oxygen than expected while decomposing organic matter. In short, being a farmer on Mars will be less about knowing how to handle a shovel and more about being able to solve complex analytical chemistry problems. Inside a greenhouse resembling a clean room and a medical office for nervous vegetables, packed with sensors and always monitored. This slightly changes the vegetable garden's atmosphere. Anyway, even in the best case, the yield from your crops won't be enough to feed your small colony, because the amount needed to achieve food self-sufficiency is simply unattainable. Since you don't plan to stay for more than a year and a half, you probably brought enough freeze-dried food with you. Your crops will mainly be there to show that it's possible to grow a bit of soil elsewhere and to lift your spirits. Because a fresh lettuce leaf on another planet probably has the same moral value as a violin at the bottom of a good bunker, and it helps keep the atmosphere from feeling like an extended waiting room in the void. Note that if by chance there are ever missions longer than yours, food self-sufficiency will probably be established. Around spirulina patties, protein pastes made from bacteria and algae, which have the advantage of being nutritious. And they multiply very quickly in bioreactors, while using little space and tolerating controlled environments very well. But the cornerstone of your survival is undoubtedly energy. On Mars, it's your ability to transform your environment that keeps you from returning to nothingness. Without it, you quickly run out of air and water, and without a heating system, the temperature in the living modules quickly drops to -100 degrees. The problem is that Mars isn't exactly a turnkey energy paradise. To supply your base with energy, there aren't many solutions. The Martian air is too thin to consider wind turbines, and relying solely on energy produced by solar panels isn't enough. Would require absolutely gigantic surfaces to cover all your needs. Because Mars is farther from the Sun than Earth. And anyway, the dust storms that can cover the planet should discourage you from relying on it entirely. At the moment, only one credible solution exists on paper. This one involves bringing a miniature nuclear reactor with you. A compact, controllable energy source, independent of the weather, and capable of powering your entire base. Unfortunately, such a machine weighs hundreds of tons. And above all, no one knows how to build it, let alone land it on another planet. And where the Martian adventure becomes absolutely fascinating is that for every step we've just mentioned, there's a non-zero chance that something could go wrong. And each time, no rescue operation is possible. So throughout your entire mission, you have to spend a considerable amount of your time keeping a close eye on everything to make sure it all works perfectly. And sometimes to repair things. Because even if your equipment is more reliable than just about anything humanity has ever made, there will inevitably come a time when reality will stray from the plan and start to squeak. We like to imagine the lives of astronauts as those of exceptional pilots sailing among the stars. But yours is much more likely to resemble that of a handy screwdriver, ready to step in at the slightest malfunction to maintain the oxygen filters, the buildings, and take care of all the piping. Activities that are rarely filmed in slow motion with heroic music in the background. And since here, a system failure is as serious as an organ giving out on you, all your vital systems come in multiple copies. There's your first generator, your margin for error, the second one, and the backup one. If unfortunately that one also stops working, your life will do the same. To face the mountain of heavily armed technical problems waiting for you on the surface and along the way, make sure to also bring enough spare parts. Because here, if you forget a spare part, even something as simple as a steel screw, and you can't make it yourself, all you can do is cry, and your tears will start to boil. because the nearest open store is 55 million kilometers away. When evening comes, after another day spent managing not to be the first human to die on another planet, when you can finally isolate yourself in your personal space that's barely bigger than a small bathroom with no way to open the window, you can finally be glad you were chosen for this mission. Both for your ability to operate and repair pumps, but also for your incredible skill at enduring for several years the way your colleagues, who sometimes get on your nerves, chew their freeze-dried food. The astronauts who will be selected to go to Mars will be extremely tolerant, resilient, and accommodating human beings capable of not breaking down when radioactive grains of sand are stuck between their toes. I hope you won't hold it against me, but I'm going to leave you here. Because I deliberately forgot to mention the fact that, for now, we don't have any technology capable of bringing you back to Earth by taking off from Mars. If I had told you, you wouldn't have come. Today, the red planet is not technically out of reach. It's just surrounded by a number of problems that, on paper, we are capable of solving. But imagination is still the cheapest and least dangerous part of the project. As soon as we start looking at reality in detail, it starts to look like a technical audit on tranquilizers. Even the least ambitious scenarios, which involve setting up a high-tech bivouac there for the minimum amount of time before leaving, remain a titanic undertaking. If we look at things with clarity, the only thing NASA really knows how to do is build a heavy launcher to put pieces into Earth orbit to assemble a ship that can go there, which is still in development, and a capsule to return to Earth's atmosphere on the way back. Between the two, almost everything else is missing. The propulsion module to get there, the capsule or habitat, the lander, the modules to survive at least 2 years on the surface, the mini nuclear power plant, and the pressurized vehicles and other robots to assist you once you're there. Absolutely all of that still needs to be done. And yet, despite this list that would make any reasonable person want to stay on Earth, there are people ready to undertake such a journey for the symbolic power alone. Because make no mistake, if the main goal of going to Mars is to find life, sending robots instead of humans is much less expensive and dangerous. Unlike us mammals made of meat, machines have the huge advantage of coping just fine without a mouth or any privacy. And incidentally, they are not prone to existential crises. If we are willing to leave a part of ourselves behind to go there in the flesh, rather than sending robots made of chips and bolts, it's precisely because we have this deeply strange tendency to see the greatest difficulties involved in crossing new frontiers as invitations. Even though, in absolute terms, robotic missions could one day accomplish tasks as complex as those carried out by humans, the very act of setting foot on another planet is, for some, an objective that justifies the existence of such a project in itself. Because we love extreme challenges, because just like the highest peaks, Mars is a symbol of our desire to surpass ourselves and our thirst for exploration. An argument that I personally find completely acceptable and commendable. Unlike the one commonly put forward by the richest clown on the planet, who sees Mars as a planet B, and for whom. The justification for this magnificent adventure is to establish a colony there to reduce the chances of humanity's extinction in case things go wrong on Earth. An argument that is as stupid as it is dangerous. If the goal is to make a world habitable that, on paper, is a real hell in order to try to make it an Earth 2.0, maybe it would be better to start by not ruining the original version. In fact, you can look at the problem from every angle, even in the darkest and most catastrophic scenarios, such as a large-scale meteorite impact or a total nuclear war. There would still be partially habitable regions on Earth that would always be little corners of paradise, compared to what Mars is today. If we're only talking about global warming, in what mindset is the solution to the problems we've created to run away from them rather than face them? In this sense, the greatest challenge of our time is surely not to colonize a frozen red planet, but to learn not to mess up our own. When we talk about space travel, we often hear that Earth is the cradle of humanity, and that no one wants to spend their whole life in their cradle. But maybe before thinking about leaving our cradle, we should consider growing up first. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this rather unusual video. I tried to have some fun with artificial intelligence to illustrate, in an absurd way, all those situations for which we don't have any images. I'd be really curious to hear your feedback on this idea. Otherwise, to see real images of the red planet and to discover what the rovers sent there have found, here's a video entirely dedicated to them.